Every day when I get up, I feel like I'm dying because it's very hard for me to breathe.
When you tune into my 600-pound life, you expect to see pain, struggle, and transformation. But every now and then, an episode becomes unforgettable, not because of the journey forward, but because of the excuses holding someone back.
You know what? If you aren't going to be supportive, give me
That's why I'm here.
I should have never tried to do this.
Nicole Lewis, a young mother from Ohio, stepped onto the screen with tears, fears, and a desperate hope for change. Yet instead of determination, viewers witnessed a storm of explanations, justifications, and endless blame. So here's the question. How many excuses can one person make in a single episode? And what do those excuses really reveal? The first layer of excuses. Every patient featured on My 600lb Life has a backstory. Nicole Lewis was no exception. At just 23 years old, she was already tipping the scales at nearly 700 pounds. She lived in Marion, Ohio with her fiancé and her children. On the surface, it looked like she was ready for help, ready to commit, ready to claw her way back to a normal life. But from the very first scenes of her episode, it became clear that Nicole's greatest weight wasn't just on her body, it was in her words. The excuses started early, and they never seemed to stop. Nicole framed her eating habits as something that had been planted in her from childhood. She claimed that she grew up in a chaotic environment where food was the only comfort available. "I didn't choose this," she suggested. "It was all I ever knew." That statement is both heartbreaking and revealing, but it also sets the tone for the entire episode. Nicole's struggle was less about ownership and more about deflection. Instead of confronting her present reality, she cast her childhood as the immovable villain. Now, no one can deny that the environment plays a role. Trauma, neglect, and poverty often contribute to obesity. But when those explanations are repeated over and over, they start to sound like a shield. Nicole wasn't just sharing her story, she was building a fortress of excuses around herself. Each brick was a memory, a justification, a way to soften the blow of her choices. The next layer of excuses came with motherhood. Nicole insisted that her size wasn't really her fault because she was so busy caring for her children. She claimed she had no time to cook proper meals, no energy to exercise, and no resources to change her habits. Every attempt at accountability circled back to the same point. "I can't do this because I have kids." In reality, her children were the very reason she needed to make the change. But in Nicole's mind, they became the perfect excuse for delay, for inaction, for postponing her health until tomorrow. Then there was her fiancé, who acted as both caretaker and enabler. Nicole often implied that she couldn't make different choices because of him. If he brought fast food, she ate it. If he didn't step in, she claimed she had no control. Here the excuse was subtle but powerful. She placed the burden of her own decisions on the shoulders of someone else. It wasn't Nicole reaching for the bag of burgers, it was the circumstances around her that supposedly left her no choice. When Nicole was filmed struggling to move around her home, she turned that moment of raw vulnerability into another justification. She explained that her lack of mobility was the reason she couldn't exercise, rather than admitting that her size was the outcome of avoiding exercise in the first place. This circular logic, "I'm too big to move, so I can't lose weight," was one of her most common refrains. Instead of seeing movement as a gradual process that could begin with small steps, she presented it as an impossibility, shutting the door before it could even open. What stood out most in this early part of the episode was how natural these excuses seemed for Nicole. They weren't delivered with malice or even with much thought. They spilled out of her like reflexes, as if every criticism, every challenge, every uncomfortable truth had a ready-made answer waiting. And because the excuses flowed so easily, they almost sounded convincing. Viewers could sympathize until they realized that every excuse came at the cost of progress. But there's a deeper layer here. Excuses aren't just lies we tell others. Often they're stories we tell ourselves to cope. For Nicole, each excuse may have been a way to protect herself from shame. To say, "I can't because of my past," is gentler than admitting, "I won't because I'm afraid." Excuses cushion the hard truth, turning brutal accountability into something softer, something survivable. Still, the result is the same: stagnation. In Nicole's introduction, we saw a young woman full of reasons but empty of momentum. Childhood trauma, busy motherhood, an enabling partner, physical limitations. Each one might hold a sliver of truth, but together they formed a wall high enough to block any path forward. Excuses in childhood, in relationships, and in motherhood laid the foundation of Nicole's story. But when she entered Dr. Now's program, those excuses didn't disappear, they multiplied. Because now it wasn't just about explaining her past, it was about defending her present. Could she handle the strict diet? Could she commit to exercise? Or would every challenge be met with another explanation, another justification, another wall between her and recovery? The inner story. When Nicole finally arrived in Houston to meet Dr. Nozaradan, her words carried just as much weight as her body. This was the moment viewers anticipated, the chance to see if she would take responsibility, follow instructions, and begin real change. But almost immediately, the old patterns returned. Nicole didn't come armed with determination, she came armed with reasons. And for every rule Dr. Now gave her, there seemed to be a matching excuse waiting in her pocket. The very first barrier was food. Dr. Now's strict plan required Nicole to cut calories dramatically, eliminate junk food, and focus on protein and vegetables. Instead of approaching it with discipline, she treated it like an impossible challenge designed to make her fail. "The diet is too hard," she sighed. "There's no way I can eat like this." It wasn't just a complaint, it was a way to shift the responsibility. If the diet itself was unreasonable, then failure wasn't her fault. It was the programs. Nicole also leaned heavily on the excuse of pain. When asked to move more, to walk, to take the tiniest steps toward mobility, she often insisted that her body simply couldn't handle it. "I'm in too much pain," she explained. "My knees, my back, everything hurts." On the surface, this made sense. 700 pounds does strain the joints, but again the circular reasoning returned. Her size caused the pain, but the pain excused her from reducing her size. It was a closed loop that made progress nearly impossible. Another recurring theme was stress. Nicole claimed that her life was too stressful to focus on weight loss. She pointed to financial problems, family drama, and the difficulty of being far from home in Houston. Each source of stress became a reason to eat, a reason to avoid exercise, a reason to postpone effort. In Nicole's world, stress wasn't a barrier to overcome. It was a blanket excuse that covered every slip. Perhaps the most striking excuse came in the form of blame toward others. Nicole insisted that people around her didn't understand what she was going through. When Dr. Now confronted her with the reality of her non-compliance, she hinted that he was being unfair, too demanding, too quick to judge. By shifting the criticism onto him, she avoided absorbing it herself. Instead of hearing, "You need to take responsibility," she flipped the script to, "You're not being supportive." This is a classic deflection, and it became one of her most noticeable defense strategies throughout the episode. Nicole also framed herself as a victim of circumstances beyond her control. She talked about how expensive healthy food was, how she couldn't always access the right groceries, how the world seemed stacked against her efforts. There is truth in that. Healthy eating can be costly. But in the context of Dr. Now's program, where thousands of patients had made the same changes with the same constraints, it became another excuse disguised as a fact. Even when small victories appeared, Nicole managed to dilute them with justifications. If she lost a few pounds, she would claim it wasn't enough because her body was different. If she managed to follow the diet for a short while, she would argue that it was temporary because no one could possibly sustain it. Instead of celebrating progress, she used her words to predict failure in advance, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy that chipped away at motivation. Excuses also became a way for Nicole to protect her image. Admitting that she hadn't followed instructions meant admitting she lacked discipline. So instead, she cloaked every misstep in an external reason. If she gained weight, it wasn't because she broke the rules, it was because stress was unbearable. If she didn't exercise, it wasn't because she avoided it, it was because her pain was too severe. Every outcome had a ready-made explanation that placed responsibility anywhere but on her own choices. This pattern created frustration not only for Dr. Now but also for viewers. Time and again, Nicole was given tools, guidance, and opportunities. And time and again, those opportunities were swallowed by words. What could have been a breakthrough moment became another cycle of justification. It was almost as if Nicole believed that saying the right excuse could erase the reality of her actions. The midpoint of her episode, viewers weren't just counting calories, they were counting excuses. And the tally was growing faster than the weight loss ever could. Nicole's justifications became so frequent, so layered, that you couldn't help but wonder, was she even aware of how often she said them? Or had excuses become such an automatic reflex that they spilled out before she even noticed? Inside Dr. Now's program, Nicole's excuses covered everything from diet to pain to stress. But the story didn't end there. The real test came when progress stalled, when the pressure increased, and when accountability could no longer be avoided. Would Nicole rise to the challenge and finally confront the truth, or would she double down, piling excuse upon excuse until there was no room left for change? Excuses at the breaking point. By the time Nicole reached the latter part of her journey with Dr. Now, the pattern was undeniable. Every patient on my 600 lb life hits a wall at some point, but what makes the difference is whether they climb over it or build excuses around it. Nicole chose the latter, and this stage of her episode showed just how far she was willing to stretch her explanations to avoid accountability. When her weight loss slowed to a crawl, Dr. Now confronted her directly. His scales do not lie, and his sharp eye sees through excuses like glass. But Nicole insisted that she had been following the program. "I'm eating what I'm supposed to," she claimed. "I don't know why I'm not losing more." To viewers, the answer seemed obvious. She wasn't sticking to the plan. But Nicole's insistence wasn't about logic, it was about protecting her self-image. Admitting failure meant facing shame. So instead, she hid behind the excuse of mystery weight gain, a phenomenon as elusive as it was convenient. Another major excuse came when Nicole argued that her family responsibilities were sabotaging her. She explained that the demands of caring for her children left her with no energy to cook healthy meals or focus on herself. In this narrative, motherhood wasn't a motivator, it was a scapegoat. Every missed milestone, every lack of progress was framed as the inevitable result of putting her kids first. But in truth, her children were suffering from her condition too. Her immobility limited her ability to care for them, and her excuses only prolonged that reality. Nicole also shifted blame onto the medical system at sea. Perhaps the most startling excuse was when Nicole implied that her partner and family weren't doing enough to help her. Despite their visible role in enabling her eating habits, she painted herself as abandoned, unsupported, even victimized. "If they really cared, they'd make it easier for me," she suggested. Again, responsibility shifted outward. Instead of recognizing that her recovery was hers alone, she insisted that others were failing her. The irony, of course, was that those same loved ones were often the ones bringing her fast food, sometimes at her own request. At this stage, denial became Nicole's strongest defense mechanism. When progress stalled, she denied non-compliance. When confronted with evidence, she denied responsibility. When offered opportunities, she denied the possibility of success. Denial is the final fortress of excuses. It shields the ego from collapse, but it also traps the individual in stagnation. Nicole's words weren't just excuses anymore, they were outright refusals to engage with reality. And yet, in her quieter moments, you could see the cracks. When Nicole cried about her situation, when she admitted fleeting glimpses of fear, it was clear she knew the truth. The problem wasn't ignorance, it was avoidance. Excuses had become her armor, her mask, her way of surviving shame. But armor that never comes off eventually becomes a prison. What makes Nicole's story so striking is the sheer variety of her excuses. She blamed childhood trauma, financial struggles, family stress, physical pain, unsupportive loved ones, and even the medical program itself. Each excuse had a grain of truth, but when piled together they formed a mountain too steep to climb. And unlike weight, which can be measured on a scale, excuses are intangible, yet their weight is just as heavy. Nicole's episode of My 600LB Life became less about physical transformation and more about the endless web of explanations she wove around herself. From childhood memories to present-day stress, from blaming her body to blaming others, she constructed an entire narrative designed to shield her from the truth. But excuses don't erase reality, they only delay it. And by the end of her journey, one question remained louder than any scale reading. How many excuses did Nicole make in just one episode, and what did those excuses cost her? What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more shocking stories. Thanks for watching.